Right, okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome back. We're going to carry on. Does anybody have any questions so far before we start on to the next topic? We're all good? Right, fantastic. Okay, right, okay. I just want to mention one thing before we carry on. I have been sending worksheets, um, and I just want to thank those people who have sent their answers. Yeah, so when I do send worksheets, it's for your own benefit, especially the children who are online. If you complete the worksheets, it'll be of benefit to yourself. Anyway, right, moving on. So regarding the major and minor sins, just to be very quick, there are what we've got to understand very, very clearly here is that you may come across in the hadith, you may come across certain stories about the Sahaba who committed certain sins, but they were done by they were made to do those sins by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? So that the ummah at a later stage would then understand that if a certain sin took place, how that would be dealt with. Okay, so the Sahaba, all of them will go to paradise, and that has been proved from the Quran Kareem. Okay, the next chapter is regarding something called Taqlid. What does the word Taqlid mean? So Taqlid refers to an ignorant person having trust or a knowledge upon a person and practicing on his view without asking for any proof. Without asking for any proof. This is taqlid. Okay. We live in a certain time. We live in a certain stage in life where it's been approximately 1400 years or more since the time of the Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So there were scholars who after the time of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, maybe in the initial 300 to 400 years, they went into detail in the Quran and the Hadith, and they made us understand the meaning of the Quran and the Hadith, and hence because of their understanding, we follow Islam correctly. So, for example, if someone were to ask me, you know, how do you follow Islam? I would say I follow Islam. I follow the Quran and the Hadith. I follow the Prophet Sallallahu. I follow Allah Subhanahu wa Taala through the teachings of Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi, for example, because I follow Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi. So this law of taqlid is found in the Quran and many Hadith. Taqlid is implemented in those matters in which there is no clear ruling in the Quran and Sunnah. Okay, there is difficulty in understanding its meaning. These verses can have more than one meaning. There's ambiguity on its meaning, and there are verses and hadith which conflict each other. Now, obviously, for this, in order to understand all this, a person requires a lot of knowledge, and hence there were scholars out there who actually made this easy for us to understand, and then we kind of follow their teaching. This is known as taqlid. So people who have very little knowledge or no knowledge at all about Islam follow those who have more knowledge of Islam. And in the Quran Kareem, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually mentions this saying, Fas'alu ahla dhikr in kuntum la ta'lamun, that ask those people of understanding if you do not understand and if you do not have knowledge of the Quran and the Hadith. This is known as taqlid. So taqlid takes place in those matters in which there are differences of opinion and many other things. Like I said, if the Quran and the Hadith, if there's no clear statement, then we would then rely on the Imams that we follow. So why do we follow them? Because their knowledge, understanding, and piety and intelligence were much higher than the individuals and the people that we know of today. And they were also closer to the Holy Prophet ﷺ than any of us. Their time, the duration that they were living in. For example, Imam Abu Hanifa regarding him is substantiated with proof that he actually met some of the Sahaba. Now, obviously, when he has um, implemented a strategy to understand the Quran and Hadith, it would be much more wise to follow Imam Murif rahmatullah alayh than coming to a conclusion ourselves. So the amount of trust which can be placed on them cannot be placed on people who came later, as well as oneself. We don't possess enough knowledge to understand the Quran and Hadith ourselves. Hence, we place our trust in one of the four Imams, which I'll come to in a moment. So there's two types of taqlid. One is taqlid mutlaq, and the other type of taqlid is called taqlid shakhsi. Taqlid mutlaq, people would ask any reputable scholar regarding any religious problem they faced, and taqlid shakhsi, meaning that people would only defer to one scholar for all their religious questions. Now, as time went on, taqlid mutlaq was abandoned, and now we only have something called taqlid shakhsi. Taqlid shakhsi meaning appointing only one person. There were many Imams who actually went through the route known as ijtihad. Ijtihad, having the knowledge, the piety, the intelligence to derive information from the Quran and Hadith. So taqlid shakhsi has now been abandoned, and like I said, many scholars in the past were followed. For example, Imam Abu Layth Samarqandi rahmatullah alayh. But now there are only four schools of thought have remained, and the schools of thought are the school of thought of Imam Murif rahmatullah alayh, the school of thought of Imam Shafi rahmatullah alayh, the school of thought of Imam Malik rahmatullah alayh, and the school of thought of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahmatullahi alayh. The reason for this is that only the school of thought of these four Imams actually were preserved. Other Imams did have their opinions, but unfortunately, their full school of thought was not preserved. These four Imams, till today, their schools of thought have been preserved. You will find people who follow each Imam nowadays. For example, in Makkah and Medina, the predominant school of thought is the Hanbali Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahmatullah alayh. If we come to the Indian subcontinent, the predominant one is Imam Murif rahmatullah alayh. If we go to West Africa, the predominant one is Imam Shafi rahmatullah alayh. And in many Arab countries, they also follow Imam Malik rahmatullah alayh. And each Imam, I mean, you can read about them in certain books, and the amount of intelligence they have, the amount of piety they had, was is something that would not be the case or not be matched in this time and age. So since other mujtahids, since other Imams' works were not compiled, they've been abandoned. So now the only option we have is to follow one of the Imams, one of the four Imams. And again, like I said, it's not something that they've made on their own initiative. They've actually clarified the Quran and Hadith, and we follow the Prophet ﷺ and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through their teachings. Speaking against any of these Imams would be a grave sin, because the amount of effort they went through was amazing. I mean, for the past 1400 years, the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah have followed one of these Imams, and to abandon any of these routes would be tantamount to a grave sin. Shah Waliullah Dehlwi rahmatullah alayh, who was a very great scholar, one of the first people to bring hadith to the Indian subcontinent, and many scholars that we see nowadays in the UK would have their chain of narration reaching Shah Waliullah Dehlwi rahmatullah alayh. So in one of his books, I think it's called Insaf or Ikhtilaf al-Ayyimah, he mentions that it's actually wajib and it's compulsory to now follow one of these Imams, because only these Imams have their school of thoughts preserved, and if a person was to act upon their own initiative, they would not come to a conclusion. I'll give you a perfect example. I mean, according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi, if a person started to bleed and the blood was to flow, according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi, their wuzu would be nullified and it would break. According to Imam Shafi rahmatullahi alayhi, when a person bleeds, their wuzu does not break. Now, both Imams, both Imams have their dalil, they have their evidence. But a layman who has no knowledge of the Quran and Hadith, how would they come to a certain conclusion? But because they both have Hadith on their side, they have evidence, and they have proofs that substantiate that evidence, they are in that position to make a certain decision. And on the day of judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not ask a person, 100%, they would not ask a person, why did you follow Imam rahmatullahi? Why did you not follow Imam Shafi rahmatullahi? But a person would be questioned upon whether they followed the Quran and Hadith correctly. And this can only be done when a person follows one of the Imams. And this is known as Taqlid. So all the four Imams they're all correct, as they spring from the Quran and Sunnah. The rulings are based on the Quran and Hadith. Hence, no person can have their own individual opinion. Taqlid is not something new to Islam. I mean, even the Sahaba, radiallahu anhum ajma'in, they would refer their own matters to the more higher position Sahaba, radiallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'in. Without the guidance and explanation of the Sharia offered by these great servants of Islam, it's not possible to follow the teachings of Islam correctly. I mean, there are groups out there even now, they don't believe in Imams. But but at certain times they have no choice as well but to follow an Imam in their opinion. For example, they follow in certain things, they follow Imam Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullahi. So whether you like it or not, at a certain stage a person does have to follow an Imam. Taqlid is the way of the Sahaba, which they handed over to the Fuqaha. Again, there's many ahadith which I don't want to go into detail. And then this method was then transmitted to the Imams, which now we follow from generation to generation, and this will be happening until the day of judgment. And that kind of ends the session there. Does anybody have any questions? You may ask in the chat box, and I will be staying online until we have any questions, or for the next 5 minutes or so. Jazakallah.